the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Authentic Audio Productions, providing a personalized, full-service audio solution for your podcast. Professional tools, custom content creation from start to finish. Authentic Audio Pro is your one-stop shop for the entire process. Visit AuthenticAudioPro.com today. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Thursday, October 10th. And you follow the show or follow me personally, it's a big day. The Mets are somehow, some way in the National League Championship Series, waiting their opponent as the rest of the series move on to game 4s and 5s, which is pretty much as good as baseball can get right now. Baseball is en vogue. That is not something I say lightly, okay? Because we are in week 6 of the NFL. The NBA is days away from kicking off. Hockey has kicked off its regular season officially in North America, and most of the buzz right now, outside of the unfortunate disasters happening in the South from Hurricane Milton, are baseball related. That's just where we are, and it's phenomenal. So enjoy it, live it up, drink it up. I was a crazy person driving down the thruway, watching Francisco Lindor hit a grand slam, almost driving myself off the thruway because he and they just continue to put miracle work at the plate. It's must see TV, even if you don't give one iota about any team that's left. Most of these games are about as entertaining as baseball can get. So I highly recommend it. And I'm thrilled that we get to go to the semifinals after what was one of the worst starts in franchise history. That's just what we have. So we're not going to talk Mets because we generally don't talk about teams until they're into the offseason. That's sort of the nature of it. And we're going to do that today with the Phillies. I'll have Dan Soemann join to talk some baseball, football at the back end. I'm just going to start with a few quick hits here. Obviously, the Tropicana Field stuff is awful, terrible. Safe recovery to anybody who's been affected, and safe recovery to Tropicana Field, because this is obviously the sports related tie to it, and that is just tough footage to watch right now. The Jets. Is that a smooth transition? I think it might be. Let's get to the Jets quickly, and I'm going to talk to Dan about this as well. But the Jets removed Robert Saleh from the head coaching position. Nothing else has changed. That's all I'm going to say about that right now. Nothing else has changed. Saleh was signed through 2025. We don't have his exact number, but he was one of the lower paid coaches in the league, as you might imagine, even though he's in one of the bigger markets. This was an entry-level situation from start to finish. And I believe that's why he doesn't have a job right now, is that he really never graduated to the point of where he had earned himself an extension. He had earned himself the place to take this team to the next level. And that's not where this team was headed, even though expectations from every angle, from the gambling angle, from the football angle, from the roster construction angle, said this was supposed to be the year a healthy Aaron Rodgers was going to take this team to the next level. I have no problem with the organization making this move, because every good team that is underachieving at any point in time, and you want to say 4 or 5 weeks isn't enough time, it's enough, should shake things up. This is the easiest move to make. Everybody knows that, right? Everybody in that locker room knows that. This was the easiest layer to lop off. But if Buffalo runs them out of New Jersey Monday night, we're going to be right back at square one with this whole conversation and with their internal investigation to what the hell we have to do now. Because now you're bleeding toward half of the season, right? You're headed towards week 7. You just got pounded by a division opponent in prime time. And the problem has not fixed itself. Nobody thinks it's going to fix itself in 1 week. But unfortunately, they've now put the pressure on themselves times 10 because they've made a move. They've stirred the pot. And there's going to be a situation where if it looks like the same old Jets that we've seen for 3 to 4 weeks, which is basically not scoring touchdowns and underachieving on defense, a situation that I thought they were going to thrive in, then I would expect more. And as I said in the past couple of shows, I'd still expect this team to be heavily invested in a Devontae Adams or some sort of piece. Obviously, you saw the owner get in front of a microphone and beg for Hassan Reddick to rejoin this roster, a move that would immediately help as long as he's in shape. So there's ways forward, but those are the impact plays. That's how this team actually changes. Aaron Rodgers isn't getting younger and sprier. Okay, he's not going to move in the pocket, and he's not going to stand there and take hits. So again, this was the easy move. But if in 4 to 5 days here, we're talking about the Bills wiping them off the floor, I would expect big time moves. And we're going to talk about a few teams that have had Jets-like starts and may not be in a position to make forward progressive moves and maybe sliding backwards. That's a couple of the questions I have for Dan. Real quick, Rafael Nadal officially has walked away from tennis. No big surprise there, 38 years old. You could see the wheel starting to come off a little bit, unfortunately. And by the way, there's no other player that you wanted to see slow down less, right? This was a player that, sure, he could hit, sure, he was left-handed, charismatic as hell, a great interview, all those things. But the athleticism was why we started to watch, why we continue to watch, why he won, why he earned himself almost $135 million on the court, okay? Why he won an absurd amount of French Opens and basically anything involving clay. That's the type of player he was. And for him to be able to do that even at 36 and 37 for small little stints was incredible. So if there was ever going to be a player that we're okay walking away maybe a little bit earlier, it's this type of player who we don't want to see the old version of Nadal. And we've seen it a little bit, unfortunately, because of injuries. We want to keep the unbelievably athletic, fast, really at times unbelievable version of Rafael Nadal in our head and take that legacy on with us. So again, top 3 in prize money, top 3 in total tournaments and majors, 92 titles, 22 slams, 4 Davis Cup titles. He's going to go for 1 more as his final swan song here with Spain. 14 French Open wins. Obviously, that was his bread and butter. He earned almost $27 million from the French Open alone in terms of his career earnings. He was 112-4 at Roland Garros, the clay court that hosts the French Open. I mean, that's it. They've already got the statue there. Literally, it's there. It's not going anywhere. He is that man, and that's the legacy. So, if you haven't read the book is outstanding. This is one of those guys you should be modeling your life after, not just your athletic life, but life in general in terms of ingratiation and appreciation and empathy and all the things that kind of get lost in in translation with athletics, especially professionally speaking. But this is the one of the top dogs from A to Z, and tough to see him go away. But like I said, good to have the fresh moments of him just blowing people off the court with athleticism. And that's certainly the takeaway. All right, let's get a little deeper into some of these numbers and talk the Phillies as they head to the offseason. Thank you, Mets, and some of this NFL stuff that we're dealing with for Week 6 and beyond. All right, Dan, let's begin with the Phillies. The Philadelphia Phillies walk away from the NLDS. Losers head into an offseason. Here's the initial thought, and we'll dive in as deep as we can here. But this roster is intact, right? I mean, this is the starting rotation's intact. Some semblance of the bullpen could be mixed back together, and all the big boppers are either under contract or within reach from an arbitration standpoint. We've got those estimates now live on Spectra.com. So, question number 1 is simply this: they walk away from the NLDS. They walked away early last year. Do you believe that for the most part, this roster will remain intact this winter, or is this an area where you might see some fireworks?
I think mostly it would be run back, but I mean, there's been enough smoke around Nick Castellanos. I could see them trying to move on from him and create some opportunity, some roster opportunity, if you will, there.
Which is funny because I'm not sure there was a more clutch player for them. I mean, he was the guy getting the hits.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not. I don't know if I'm advocating that. I'm just sort of looking and seeing where they might kind of create some spots. Beyond that, I mean, I don't really see a lot that needs to be done here. It just, to me, it feels like it'd be an overcorrection for basically a powerhouse team that just ran into variance in a 5-game series, right?
Right. That's definitely the part of the season we're at right now. But this is a GM, Dan, that we've seen be very aggressive in the past. So I guess the question is this: what is their hole? What is the reason that that 2 years in a row they're not at the finish line?
To me, it's depth. When you kind of look at the offensive depth, mixing and matching, it feels pretty thin to me. Once you get into like the bullpen matchups in the playoffs, where you're really utilizing your bench every game, I think that's probably going to be a critical focus for them. I know you've kind of hinted at like Juan, this being like a sleeper destination for Juan Soto. I mean, obviously that would be a massive move that would cover up like a number of holes on any roster. So if that happens, that would be obviously a shocker, but I think that would cause a ripple effects of other moves on this roster that we're not necessarily thinking about right now in the immediacy.
I agree. I mean, look, this is the most expensive team in baseball right now next year in terms of guaranteed contracts and where things are headed from the arbitration standpoint. They know it. They've been locking in players left and right. They locked in a couple of pitchers this past offseason. The Harper deal, the Trey Turner deal, obviously are way out there in terms of terms and guaranteed money remaining. So you do have a couple of simpler processes like Castellanos or Schwarber in place, but I'm just not sure that the lineup is the problem. And that's what's interesting with this team is they're loaded with starting pitching. Here's an interesting topic, I think, to that maybe may carry through with this offseason, not just with us, but with a lot of outlets. Is it possible to have too much starting pitching? Especially in the postseason? Yeah,
so during the year, no. My answer is staunchly no to that.
Right, and this was the best record in baseball. They won their division. They were the Dallas Cowboys, right? They crushed the regular season. There's no question.
Right, and I mean as we've done off-season roster work in the past. I mean teams typically need between 10 and 12, 13 starters at any point throughout the season. Now I know there's cases to be made for starters and how teams like Detroit have navigated this, but I think over the course of 162 games, that's like next to near impossible for a pitching staff to execute, a manager to execute game plan for every single game. So I will always be of the mindset that you need a good chunk of players that can go out every 5 days and get you 5 innings, right? Now in the playoffs, though, it's a total game changer, especially with these 3 and 5 game series to start. I mean, we're seeing this play out where Cleveland right now is against the wall, pretty simply because, it looks very, very long shot right now because of Tarik Skubal getting 2 starts in a 5-game series, and he looks untouchable for a good chunk of the entire season here. So, I mean, you compete. We're seeing them do it, and Cleveland to some degree too, going into the season with Matt Boyd and Alex Cobb as their 2-3 starters in the playoffs. They're sort of piecing it together with these bullpen arms and Matt taking it matchup by matchup, inning by inning. So in the playoffs, everything changes, and I think their teams need to find a happy medium where I think the point you're trying to get at is do these teams with ace starters feel obligated to stick with Zach Wheeler or stick with Aaron Nola in these high leverage spots when maybe they should be quicker to go away and play the matchups with a pretty good bullpen? The Phillies have still a pretty solid bullpen there. So I think it's a fair question to ask. Staunchly during the season, though, I don't see that being a long-term process that teams roll with. I think you need pitchers during the season.
let me take it in a different direction, because all of that's 100% valid, and it's not an accident that the postseason and the way teams treat the postseason is completely different, right? I mean, these are two separate seasons. They always have been, but maybe more so than ever with how things are run from an analytical standpoint. When I run financials on pitching staffs, right? Because I do a lot of splits between batters and pitchers and how teams build their teams that way. I can't tell you how things have drastically changed, right? For decades, truly, it was, you would go to a pitching staff from a contract standpoint. You would look at the 15 to 18 pitchers that are being carried, throughout the season, whatever it's going to be. And bang, right at the top, Dan, starter, right? And then maybe even a long reliever or somebody right there. It's just not that way anymore, right? And the teams that are getting to the finish line aren't even close to built that way. Now, there's a couple of anomaly pitchers that sneak through still, obviously. But for the most part, it's one, maybe two high-paid starters, then maybe ranked 3rd to 11th are all going to be relievers in terms of salary, right? All relievers, including the closer, obviously, and the setup guy. But even the lefty, the guy who comes in for 3 batters and gets out every time, right? The specific relievers are making $7 to $9 million now in this league, truly. And then at the bottom, you'll have, the number 3 and number 4 guys on your rotation, either in pre-arb status or in arb 1 status, making about $1 million. And that's how teams are doing their business now. It's getting to the point where it's no longer just a starting rotation and a bullpen. It has now completely come together. It is a pitching staff. Contracts are being treated that way. There's no real separation anymore outside of, like I said, the anomalies. Zach Wheeler at $42 million next year, right, is going to be an anomaly across the entire league, not just in the Phillies. But it's really something to start to watch. And we've talked about the devaluation process and how starters are going less and there's openers still and all that stuff. But it's really just more about the increased value of the bullpen. And by the way, that comes with a devaluation at the closer role too, right? We're starting to see that quickly. The closers are becoming kickers in football really as fast as humanly possible. If you don't have a guy like the guy, it's a revolving door and you're paying for nothing. You're just going to throw Luke Weaver out there, New York Yankees, and make his $750,000 work for you for the entire postseason, because who knows what's happening with your $8 million guy. So the point is, as starting money comes down, and it is, reliever money's coming up. It's just all bleeding together. We're heading toward a world where it's just going to be 10 to 11, $8 to $9 million pitchers, and then 4 to 5 completely cheap, year one pre-arb pitchers. And it's going to be lightning in a bottle, because you have to build in Tommy Johns and 6 months off here and 3 months off here. And that's the game they're playing, right? It's cat and mouse, and they're not chasing money for it anymore, is my point. And the smarter teams figured that out 3 years ago. And I think some of the older teams, and by the way, the Mets with Scherzer and Verlander, they learned the hardest way possible, right? They went and paid 2 guys that were way past it, $43 million each, and had to blow it up in the middle of the season. So that may be the shot around the world that told everybody else, holy crap, this thing isn't just bad, it's completely broken. Let's start going and looking at our draft picks right now, because those draft picks are probably number 4 starters on our roster tomorrow if we make all the finances work around that. So it's fascinating where this is headed. But I guess as we get towards the offseason and free agency, don't be surprised when guys who go for 1 inning every 2 to 3 days start making $11 million in this league, because it's coming. It's here in certain cases, but it's going to be on every single roster, if not this season, within the next 3 seasons.
Yeah, I'd mostly agree with that.
Yeah. Do you think that we're at a point now, Dan, where you mentioned the need for 10 to 12 starting pitchers because of injuries and all that stuff, right? Are we getting to a point now where it's going to be really hard to find an ace in this league? You mentioned Skubal. We've got Wheeler. But look around some of these playoff teams. Who's the Mets ace?
Yeah, so I mean, to your previous point, I guess, like to lump that in with this, I guess I'm hesitant that really anybody is going to really get paid good chunks of money going forward. But I think you're just saying we're going to see more of a middle class of pitchers making like
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Money rather than the real lofty high end contracts, and that's what I agree with. I think there will always be outliers. There will always be very good borderline elite pitchers that somehow make it to free agency in a year that a team needs, that the rest of the roster is set up to win. They need one ace. There will always be those instances, those one-off scenarios where somebody will get paid. Elite pitchers will get paid like that. For the most part, though, I mean, how teams are asking, like, we're in this box where teams are essentially telling players they need to develop a certain way, which we know breaks them in the long term, right? They're maximized for a shorter career window, if you will, which performance wise looks great, but from a contractual standpoint where you need 6 years of service to get to free agency and then start talking about serious money, I mean, I'm really just hesitant that pitchers are ever going to get paid until there's some sort of labor change. But maybe I'm like too far down the wormhole with that kind of.
So let's fast forward then, because this conversation kind of precedes this next one, which is we've got Blake Snell, we've got Corbin Burns headed to the free agency here, right? Snell is coming back for round 2 after just a weird round 1 that actually ended up working pretty well for him. He made $30-some million and might be the best pitcher on the market again, right? With Scott Boras. Or no, did he dump Boras? No. Who dumped Boras? Jordan Montgomery dumped Boras,
Jordan
right?
Montgomery, yeah.
All right, so Snell and Boras. Are either Blake Snell and Corbin Burns in that outlier tier? Or are they going to be in this suppressed situation that we're talking about that, everybody's now saying the quiet part out loud with that, right? It's not really an accident. We saw it last offseason during free agency. The pitchers had to wait till the very last minute just to get themselves basically 1-year contracts. Where do those players fall in this conversation?
I mean, this is these are always so contextual for me to respond to. Corbin Burns, I think, falls into that category, but he is a little bit of he's a bit of an older pitcher in terms of I think the days of these 8, 9, 10-year deals for pitchers are largely gone, where we're going to just see that supplanted by the high average per year. Right. So Burns, I think total is going to get paid a nice chunk of money, but I don't know that it's going to be 7 years, right? I mean, so that's where I'm at with this. I don't know if that answered the question or just twisting it into something different.
It's okay. You're kind of nibbling at it, and I'll come back with some numbers to it, which is because I want to bring the Phillies back into this conversation. The Phillies just this past year, Dan, went 7 for 172 with Nola, their number 2, and tacked on 3 for what? 126? Yeah, 3 for 126 to Zach Wheeler. Okay, so they went basically $300 million on a 10-year term for their number 1 and number 2 starter. Is that good business in 2025 Major League Baseball?
I mean,
they were both great. They both went 4+ WAR and did everything they had to do. They were both outstanding. So I'm not sitting here knocking them. I'm just talking about the process. That's all.
In a vacuum, I think there are better ways to build a team, but for a team like the Phillies in that market, it's sort of the cost of doing business to me, right? So, I mean, he earned his contract. He got his service time. He's performed extremely well throughout his career. I mean, it all sets up for this guy to have gotten paid in free agency. Do I think there are better ways to build a team sustainably? Yes, but the sustainable part is kind of the trigger point there, if you will, because some of these teams aren't necessarily focused on how to build efficiently and sustainably, right? So we know the Philly, we've talked about this countless times. the Phillies will come home. It's going to come home to roost where they're going to pay a lot of money to players that we look at and are like, why do they have this amount of money committed to this player at this age? But I mean, that's again the cost of doing businesses, and when teams can afford to play in that area, it's really hard for me to kind of split it away from what I think is like efficient team building, right? Like from a value perspective, from I guess how I'm like to zoom out and use Cleveland's near to me. I can speak on this pretty well. They just had one of the most dominant bullpens in the history of baseball, correct?
Yep.
And that is anchored by a dominant closer, an elite closer that is on a team-friendly pre-arbitration deal. But the rest of those guys have 4, 5, 6 years of experience left, correct? Like of team control left. Mm-hmm. So all I'm trying to say here is like when a team can put themselves in that position, and oh, by the way, they have plenty of arms in their system, and Cleveland's not the only team who does this. These teams that you look around and see an elite bullpen, they have elite arms in that bullpen and arms down the pipeline as well. So what I'm trying to say is those teams are the ones that can afford that, like they navigate that pitching market so efficiently, in my opinion. Now Cleveland, they don't always reassess that money into offense, but you know what I'm trying to say here. It's sort of like an endless pipeline of pitching, specifically relief pitchers, because they're just so refined in dialing in these guys' skill sets to get them to be max pitchers for 1 or 2 innings that they can use in the bullpen. And then by the time they need to get paid, they trade them somewhere else. Some other team that is less smart pays them, and they just tap right back into their pipeline. I hope I laid that out.
It's way easier. I would think logically. Again, I don't have experience being a bullpen coach or a pitching coach. It seems way easier to develop a player for one role, for 1 inning with 2 pitches for 3 batters, right? Start there. Get everybody ramped up that way as sort of their entry level into the major leagues. And then if you see, or if you have an intuition that they can expand that out to a 3rd pitch or a 4th pitch and become a 6th inning starter, you develop them into that, right? That just seems the better way to do it. That's how Cleveland has always done it. That's how Tampa Bay has always done it. There's a reason those smaller markets have been successful for 2 decades. And it seems to be that they develop pitchers that start games. They don't acquire starters and try to redevelop them into better starting pitchers, right? So if you're going the other route, and this is the Yankees, by the way, and I hate to bag on the Yankees here, but the Yankees have always tried to build and buy starting pitching. And every so often, lightning in a bottle works. Certainly with Garrett Cole, that's the best example they've had probably in the past 3 or 4 decades. But that doesn't seem to be the way, based on everything we've just said for 20 minutes, which is everything's sort of coming together, and you need 12 guys who can start, and you probably need 11 guys that you can rotate through a bullpen through 162 plus 4 rounds for sure. And you need your 6th inning guy to be an 8th inning guy, and you need your 6th, 7th, and 8th inning guys to be able to close at times, right? And it just seems like everybody has to be able to handle their role, starting with at least 1 inning. I just think everything's going to be flipped on its head soon. You know what I mean? And Cleveland's model and Tampa Bay's model and I think there are other teams doing it this way. Obviously, I just don't have them at the top of my head, but that's going to become even how the big boys have done this. And the Dodgers have started this as well. Let's bring them in this conversation. But to see Pittsburgh throwing Skeens and Jared Jones and these guys out there for 7 innings, knowing that there's just going to be a cutoff. We know it's coming. Everybody knows it's coming. And they're going to spend a ton of money at some point and go way outside their boundaries. And everybody's going to be all in on them, right? This feels like, the worst NFL offseason ever for Carolina, which we'll get to in a second. But that's coming, right? They still seem to be developing the old way, which is let's just load up on a big starting rotation. And then when these guys seem like they have it figured out, We'll spend $200 million in the offseason. We'll buy a closer and we'll try to go and do it. I just don't think that can work anymore. And to keep that around and to keep that going, which is kind of what Philly's doing, right? They're trying to keep that process going. That seems backwards thinking to me, but that's all.
Yeah. No, maybe we're trying to polarize this to one end of the spectrum or the other too much, and I think we're correct in. Let me just polish it up by saying this: I think you're right in that we're going to trend that way, and I think I'm right in terms of there will always be the need for 2-3 anchor starters in any rotation, right? So like the bullpen game, piece by piece, that stuff gets torched once you have like a long extra innings game or a double header. Like that kind of stuff can just ruin your like quote unquote plan. So that's all I'm trying to say is I think like 5 years from now, I think it's more likely that we see a lot of teams with one Tariq Skubal and one Gavin Williams and one Joey Cantillo or something. And then the other 2 days, you need to occupy are more of like bullpen game. I know I just mixed Detroit and Cleveland, but you know what I'm trying to say there. I think it's more likely we go that route where there's still a chunk of bulk starters and then the rest of your team is just these dominant, dynamic arms that you can use role specific situations. We're seeing Detroit is bringing Bo Brisky in to close games and pitch 2.5, 2 2/3 innings in the middle of a game. Like that is really impressive when you can do that. Like I said, I have trouble thinking an organization can operate like that every 5 days, 4 out of every 5 days. Right. So. It's
fascinating. You're right. There's definitely, we're in a different world right now with the postseason and things get crazy and wonky and there's desperation involved, obviously. But, the Mets are doing the same thing with David Peterson, a player who was a DFA candidate, 18 months ago, truly, and now might be their second best starter, their long reliever, and has been in the 9th inning in games for this team in the postseason as well. So I just think it takes a little bit of fresh juice in the front office. It's not unlike what we saw the San Francisco 49ers try to do, right? And create this new model of offense and add weapons that maybe weren't the highest paid weapons in football. But when you put 3 to 4 of them together, you have the most expensive set of weapons in football, right? Collectively. That's kind of the conversation we're having here with pitchers is pitchers are individual weapons. And when each weapon can be versatile and you don't need to set a designated 5 starters. You don't need to set a 7th inning guy or even a 9th inning guy, which I think we're seeing more and more teams fall in love with. So I just think it's becoming more rogue, more wide open. And to bring it back to our world, that's going to be the wild, wild west for salaries completely. Like you're asking me to put a value on Blake Snell, but you're also asking me to put a value on Nick Martinez, right? Or Ranger Suarez, a guy who pitched yesterday, who could be somebody's number 2, could be the Phillies number 5 next year, and could be a 7th inning reliever within 2 seasons. You know what I mean? And all of that might be worth $7 million to somebody. And I'm not sure where we're headed with that, but it's truly becoming a wild, wild west situation.
Yeah. And if, a good chunk of the money dedicated towards pitching throughout the league is shaved off, watch out for position player salaries.
Exactly. Right? Good news for Juan Soto. By the way, I have a new sleeper team. I wonder if you could guess it. It's a team that has spent well, is right at the cusp of a breaking point because of arbitration stuff, because of some older guys aging out, because of the money they've spent that has just gone to waste. A team that has had maximum potential, maximum expectations, and just fell flat on their face 2 years in a row. But I think maybe they believe that they've been dogged in free agency now 2 years in a row, but this is the time they're going to get it right with Juan Soto. Any guesses?
Toronto.
It is Toronto.
Yeah. I think they're going to be involved. Unfortunately, they could be the side chick that
it feels like Boris just uses Toronto every year to get an extra $50 million.
It could be Ohtani all over.
And Judge. Everybody's been involved. Everybody's had the steak dinner there. And my God, we had Flight Tracker with Ohtani. I just feel like they never recovered from that, Dan. They thought they were getting the guy just like we all thought they were getting him, and then they never recovered.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I think that would be an interesting spot, no matter what. But I don't see the Yankees not.
Toronto has the money to spend. There's no question. People undervalue Toronto constantly because it's this foreign world to most baseball fans, right? But it is crazy rich. They continue to add, renovations to the stadium, and it's in a great spot of the city. Like, there's a lot to love when you go as a player, as a fan, all of it, right? They could go Blake Snell and Juan Soto. Financially speaking, they could do it. Would that be a game changer for them in the American League East?
Well, for sure, but not even just not even just on the field, but I think it would kind of reignite like the desire for maybe Vlad to stay longer, maybe Bo Bichette to stay longer. Or I mean, I don't know if there's mutual interest in both sides. I'm just saying we keep saying that, like, we keep thinking Toronto's inching towards like a tear down / rebuild, like need to like. Oh,
they are. If they don't get Soto, don't you think that's the direction they should go?
Right. That's what I'm saying. We're saying they're inching towards that. But if for some reason they landed Juan Soto, I think everything changes, and you'd have to reconsider all these long-term trade rumors for Vlad or Bo or whoever, and say, like, I mean, that's not a move you make when you're about to tear things down, right?
It's a 2-for-1 move, right? It's one last ditch effort to get all this development that you've done and slap 90 wins on it, but it also devastatingly weakens the Yankees in your division. Like, devastatingly. I'm not sure the Yankees, like, how many wins has Juan Soto been worth this year? I know what the WAR says, but it's at least 10, right? It's at least 10 regular season wins. And with Judge going 0-4 in this postseason, how many of those games are going to be on his back as well? So it's a twofer. It's a 2-for move, and it's worth whatever $500 million it's going to take, and whatever that is in Canadian conversion, right? I mean, I just think there's a world where they are the talk of the winter because they are buying a pitcher, they are buying a reliever, and they are buying Juan Soto. And they're just going to say, we're in. And if none of this works, we'll have to trade the pieces for parts and go from there. But I'd much rather see them do that than break it all down, because that'll just be a sad day for a lot of those players who started there as 16-year-olds,
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, they've been searching for an impact bat for like 5 seasons now. An impact bat from the left side. Sorry, let me specify. For like 5 years now. So I think that would be fun. Okay.
Let's play a little NFL game and get the hell out of here for the weekend. All right. Cause I know you've got some baseball to watch, and it's probably going to involve a couple of beers and maybe a little bit something stronger if the Tigers go up again. Which team can we cross off of this NFL season? Which team should I sit down in Google Docs and start writing the 2025 off-season stuff for already in the NFL?
I mean, the Raiders are probably my gut call. Is that surprising? I mean, the Panthers are the obvious team.
I want nothing to do with the Panthers.
I know, and that's why I just skipped over. We talked about them at length. It's just been like people thinking like the Andy Dalton 1 week thing was like some revitalization for that organization was wild times for 5 days or whatever that was. But I mean, do you have somebody you wanted to talk about?
No, I truly wanted to ask the question from an outsider looking in, because I sit with these numbers all the time. Dan, here's the problem with the Panthers. I can't even find a trade candidate. Like, people keep talking about Deontay Johnson. Well, he's an expiring contract. He'll get moved. Does anybody want Deontay Johnson?
In a vacuum, yes, but I don't know if he's like the type of player that comes in mid-season and makes like a huge impact on your team. But I mean, he's a nice player, but there's been some lingering hamstring injury stuff there. Like, is that just going to be more of a problem. I'm not sure, but I think he's a nice player.
I don't know. $3.5 million at the deadline. That still seems too rich for me. I guess Carolina can buy this down a little bit. Here's my other, I say this a lot. I'm going to say it again. Here's my fun fact about the Carolina Panthers right now. Do you know they have the least cap space in the NFL? How is that possible? How are we in this world right now? Now, I know part of why it's possible. They don't feel the need to, cap convert right now because they don't want to push anything down to the next window. So they've been signing these massive contracts and just living with the cap hits for the most part. They still got some void years and stuff on their books, but for the most part, it's just, we're going to throw bologna at a wall. We're going to let it stick there. We're not going to cut it up or put some ketchup on it or anything. We're just going to see what happens to that bologna. And eventually it's going to slide off and hit the floor. And that's where we are, right? I mean, it's just iteration 4 of this, and we're going to be back at square one. Is Bryce Young tradable? I talked about him last week a little bit. Are you in the camp that Bryce Young should be traded immediately?
Not immediately. No, I think the season's over. I think they need to give him more games this year. Now, I know it's looked bad. It looks, we've talked about me being a Baker lover, a Sam Darnold believer, et cetera, et cetera. I
can't stop talking about those players. What are you talking about? I'm in.
I love these resurrection projects, and I love betting on in theory high pedigree quarterbacks that just fail in their initial landing spots.
Mm-hmm.
I'm somewhat ready to say Bryce Young is just flat out bad. But I do think he needs a little bit more time to just prove it. And really, what do they have to lose, right? They own their first pick. They might as well be a bad record team at the top of the draft, right? I mean, what's the incentive for them to really win games at this point? They need a full rebuild, correct?
It's not great if that's what you're asking me. It's not great. They don't own their second round pick, but they do own the Rams' second round pick, which looks great right now. So theoretically, they're set up at the top of each of the first 3 rounds, 4 rounds, and then they've got 2 fifths right now, according to some data that I'm looking at in our system that I have yet to make public. But so technically they could be playing for the draft if that's the point you're trying to make now. And Bryce Young could help that. I guess the reason to not play him is you think you can trade him in the offseason, right? And you don't want to further his disastrous start by putting him out there or even getting him hurt. And
can it get worse though?
I don't know. I really don't know. No, I don't know.
This seems like pretty close to rock bottom, but I mean, they brought a quarterback whisperer coach in specifically to fix it, and he was out after 3 games. I mean, it just, I don't know. It all seems so backwards. And you now bringing up their payroll issues. I look at this roster and almost nothing is appealing to me, and knowing that no one else is going to want to sign long-term into that train wreck. Right. I mean, this. Well,
let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Cause that was the original question, right?
Sure.
The other kind of cross off teams to some degree after 5 weeks heading towards 6 here. Do the Rams need a young quarterback? Does Sean McVay want anything to do with this situation?
I say no, but I mean, there's got to be one coach out there that says I can work with those skills. But I mean, again, Dave Canales was in theory that guy, and he threw it in the trash at less than a month into the season. I just do I believe that somebody like Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay could do something with Bryce Young? Yes, I am a believer in those coaches. So
I don't know what they think of Stetson Bennett. I've heard a lot more positive things this year, and that was supposed to be kind of this version of the let's slowly develop him. And obviously there was some off-field stuff, but let's slowly develop him. And then whenever Stafford needs to hang him up, because I think it's going to be his call, not the Rams' call. Whenever Stafford wants to hang him up, maybe we got a guy. If Bennett is wavering within that organization, I do think this is a spot that you could bring in Bryce Young and just kind of let him do his thing behind McVay, behind Stafford. What could be better? Right? I mean, what could possibly be better? So that's in pencil. That's a spot for me. Here's a couple of other teams that are at the bottom right now. Jacksonville's not doing it. There's no question. Jacksonville's not doing it, right? They've already got their project back up in Mac Jones, and that's good enough. They don't need anything else there. Cincinnati's not doing it, right? I think Jake Browning might be better than everybody we've talked about right now in terms of backup quarterbacks. He already proved that for 6 weeks. They're good. Is Cleveland doing this?
I mean, I'd like to just see them roll with Jameis, but I mean, a team in theory is doing this as a backup move plus we think we can resurrect him for the future move, right? We're like kind of splitting that out into two separate things.
I'll ask it again. Is Cleveland doing this?
I'm going to say no, but
not even in pencil? Because the owners are just not letting this shit happen, right, Dan? You know this organization, you know this city. The owners have made it very clear to Kevin Stefanski that Deshaun Watson starts football games, right?
It certainly seems that way.
Yeah.
And if it isn't, then I mean, yes, I'm going to just put a period on it. Yes.
Okay. There's a very lightly drawn mechanical pencil check mark next to Cleveland for me, right? Not as hardly, drawn as I think the Rams could be in, but there's a world where Cleveland at least considers this thing. The Patriots are a no. Here's one for you. Where's Tennessee right now?
Pretty bad shape.
Yeah. Should they be selling parts these final 3 weeks of the deadline?
Yeah, I think they probably will too.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think even the coaching staff has a lot of faith in the pieces that are there right now. So, yeah.
Are they in a world, though, where Bryce Young comes in to compete with Will Levis in 2025? Or are they in the Sam Darnold market? That's where they're headed.
I mean, I would probably just start over with whatever their high draft pick turns into. But
right, a top 6-7 draft pick with Carolina. They'll be competing with Carolina for that pick, unfortunately. But
yeah, but otherwise, no. I mean, I would be fine with those.
That's the other part of this, right? With these teams we're talking about, Cleveland right now is number 3 in the draft. The Rams are number 4 in the draft. Carolina 6, Tennessee 7. Right? Anybody with a hope or a thought process that Bryce Young could come in and compete is probably just thinking, top of the draft. Not that it's the best quarterback draft, but I'm with you. If the guy who was brought in to be the quarterback whisperer gave up in 72 hours, what are we doing? What are we really talking about here, right? And I think we're headed in that direction with Will Levis too. Is kind of why I preface it that way.
I can't believe you didn't pitch me the Niners, but.
No, I officially ate crow on Monday's podcast and said that I apologize to Brock Purdy for ever saying that this was a no sign situation. I'm the last person on board with Brock Purdy getting a contract extension. It's going to happen. It's going to be explosive, especially if he's able to resurrect this season. We'll see. It starts tonight, right? We'll see if he can he can turn things around officially and really put this team on his back. Okay, so I got to get to the Raiders then. That was the team you originally picked. They are 2-3, maybe one of the worst 2-win teams we have in the league, and probably headed even more backwards. If that's the team you pick, if that's the team I'm sitting down to write, we'll finish on this. How bad does it get? I mean, am I writing about Max Crosby's trade out of town? Am I writing about everything and all encompassing? Right, Jacoby Myers is a roster bubble player. They've got Brock Bowers, but who knows after that? Like, where are we with this thing?
Yeah, I mean, it all feels really awful.
Really flimsy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and even coming in, I mean, there was smoke around Devontae Adams moving, but then, when the coaching stuff, like if I remember this all correctly, Adams was pretty vocal about Antonio Pierce being the coach after his interim stint last year. So for like things to fall off the rails again after a month of the season, to where like Pierce is like publicly outing Adams or whatever those business decision comments were about, like that has been a train wreck. Like him touting Zamir White all off season, and they can't get him the ball. They signed Gardner Minshew, and
that's got to be it, though, right? That's got to be the thing that ruined everything. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and he had I'm not going to lie, he had a decent year in Indy last year, but I feel like a lot of that was coaching and scheme related, and he got brought into an offense that just didn't fit him at all. Adam O'Connell has his faults, definitely, but I mean, at least he flashed last year to the point where I thought he should have gotten the first look with a nice, solid backup and Gardner Minshew behind him. So I just feel like they're just like chasing wind over there right now, and I don't know what happens. And yes, especially the Max Crosby stuff. Basically, what, a week ago saying I die for this city, and then now he's saying, well, me and Adams are a package deal. Like I know that's not probably 1,000% accurate, but you know what I mean? It just I can't look at one promising piece, like one direction on this roster, and say I like where it's going, other than like maybe the emergence of Trey Tucker. Obviously Brock Bauer, that's like a dominant piece long term. But I mean, what's Bowers when you are like literally at square zero at the quarterback position seemingly? So
it's a really hard ask, right? If I'm sitting down with the title, How to Fix the Raiders, it's a really hard ask right now. It's not a single off season unless it's just irrational confidence in some of the offensive line. Some of the secondary pieces seem to be coming around, right? There's some glimmers. Is it the complete opposite direction, right? Is this a Sam Darnold spot, right? Is throwing $250 million at this roster this offseason the actual right approach, or maybe the better approach, versus just re-spinning the wheels and starting from square one again with a couple of pieces that are in place?
I guess I'll have a more directional opinion on that in maybe even the next 4 weeks, once I see how, like, they're 2-2 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not.
Let me say this, because I've talked about it quite a bit, and I wonder where a lot of people's heads sit with it. I don't wrap the Davante Adams stuff into the even short-term conversation of the Raiders. His contract was always BS after this year. Right. So this is an expiring contract and a player that is probably overpaid even for what they're able to do with him, let alone what the next team's going to get for him on a rental, right? So I just think it's actually good business to trade Davante Adams, and they're just treating it as, a holdout until that happens. I'm not even sure there's that much bad blood or that Davante demanded this. I think it's a mutually accessible thing that's a little complicated because he's overpaid for what he's going to be for the next 9 weeks. You know what I mean? So I take that out. Now you put Crosby into that conversation, like we've heard could be, and that further complicates things. But Davante Adams wasn't going to be a Raider on March 12th anyway. So that's different to me.
I agree that, like, I'm speaking more towards like the short-term vibe and atmosphere of that locker room. If like a guy that seemingly vouched for Antonio Pierce to be coach is now
we're fair,
like, and even if he was like trying to work himself out of it, I mean, like publicly post game calling that out, it all seems like a really bad situation. So both things can be right. Like it's a smart business move. In a vacuum, it was a smart business move to be moving on from him, considering this team was nowhere, but they talked themselves into thinking that they would be pretty solid. So from that perspective, I'm okay with them rolling with it. But the fact that it's deteriorated this fast and publicly, I think is not like a great signal long term. That's just to me. But yeah, from a business perspective, like, they have no reason to play out the string with it. Also, the injury stuff, like, is that just NFL business posturing with the hamstring stuff? Like, it was okay pre-trade, but I mean, there's no punishment or fines coming for that kind of thing, because that's like so obvious that he's sitting out because he's unhappy, but they're coding it as a hamstring injury, right?
I mean,
or do you not want to get fined? I'm just kidding.
I mean, you know, you can wake up with a headache and have the same conversation, right? So it could be personal reasons. It could be, I don't know. I'm sure everybody's got a little tweak to something after a month worth of NFL football. So I don't think it took much to designate him as a not so healthy scratch. But yeah, we're going to see a lot of that over the next couple of weeks, I think. The Raiders are just fascinating. And let's finish with one more team quickly. What's Pittsburgh's plan forward at this position?
Well, I think your call on Russell Wilson being like a cover, I don't even know how to say it, but basically,
Russell Wilson did not win the starting job. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Never, ever.
Yeah, and that all this was more superficial and for vanity type reasons. So yeah, and that being said, we've seen Justin Fields have his faults, but I think there has been enough there for them to see how this plays out the rest of the year, and then think about moving forward with him, and maybe potentially bringing in a veteran option behind him. Maybe.
But what does that take? Is he getting Baker Mayfield's contract? Three for 100? What's it going to take to keep Justin Fields?
Good question.
Or is he not to that point? I'm not. I mean, he's not putting up Baker numbers. Maybe collectively, I guess he is, but
Sam Darnold, I don't know. That'd be probably my comp.
Right, but I guess all these teams that we're talking about, there's not going to be enough week one rookie quarterbacks in this draft, right? So there's going to be a need, which we didn't have this past offseason because Caleb and Jaden and Drake and Bo were at least within the realm of, and they're all here now, right? They're all starters, by the way, within 4 or 5 weeks. They were in that conversation. I'm not even sure we have one quarterback in the upcoming draft that is going to be pegged as a week one starter. So if the Raiders are done with Aiden O'Connell, if Tennessee's done with Will Levis, if J.J. McCarthy hasn't fully recovered, right? If Pittsburgh doesn't want to move forward with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, we've already got now almost a half dozen teams, and we don't have a half dozen quarterbacks. So there's going to be an actual carousel ride here that we're all going to have to get on, and somebody's going to be left without anything, right? Somebody's going to be left with 37-year-old Russell Wilson on a minimum contract, I believe. I don't think he's going to retire, to you. So that could be where the Raiders end up, which is kind of where we all thought he was going to be this time and the last time. And I just think, to go back to the question, how do we fix the Raiders? Don't be surprised, Dan, if Russell Wilson is the week one starter in 2025, because they just couldn't see stepping all the way back just yet.
Woof. I would rather just Aiden O'Connell it until the wheels fall off, and then you have a draft pick. But what's the rumor? Shador there? Is that wasn't Mark Davis chirping him that he might be home or something? I saw that on one of the terrible.
I mean, unfortunately, they've got the 11th pick right now, so they got to do a heck of a lot more losing over the next bunch of weeks to get even in conversation for Shador and or Travis Hunter. Right? There's teams that are much more set up for that whole situation. But yeah, that's definitely one of the names we're talking about here that could make this interesting. It's
nothing
fun.
to add.
It's fun. Week 6 talk about the 2025 offseason. That's what you're here for, right? That's what you pay for this podcast for. Good as always, man. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike.